Both the new JBL Charge 5 and Sony XB33 are rocking all new speaker setups from their predecessors. Specifically, the Charge 5 has a new tweeter over the Charge 4, whereas the XB33's new speaker setup is drastically different from its predecessors because it has these new triangular drivers and dual passive radiators that now shoot out its sides. Now, both of these speakers sound good, but if you are looking into getting a mid-size speaker, let's see which one's right for you because there are some crucial differences between the JBL Charge 5 and Sony XB33. One of which is going to be their pricing. The XB33 has a retail price of $150, but you can routinely find the XB33 on sale for $130, which I feel is fair. Whereas the Charge 5 has a retail price of $180, but I do expect it to go on sale for $150 on a regular basis. Now, even though the Charge 5 is a little more expensive, it does feel more premium and has better real-world battery life than the XB33. But regardless, if you want to pick either of these two speakers up, they'll be linked down below. Now first, let's talk about the designs of these speakers. Like I mentioned earlier, these are both mid-sized speakers, so you can easily throw them into your backpack and take them on the go with you. However, I can't help but notice that the Charge 5 is a little more compact than the XB33. Now, minor size difference aside, the Charge 5 and XB33 still share the same design characteristics. They both have these exposed passive radiators on either side with these hard plastic end caps. They both have their control buttons up top, and they both have a mostly fabric weave body, which should be able to stand up to constant abuse without any problems. However, I do gotta point out that the fabric weave on the Charge 5 feels more premium and much more tightly woven than the fabric on the XB33. So the Charge 5 does feel more premium in your hands. Now, this shouldn't be a deciding factor for a speaker, but it is an observation. Now, even though the XB33 doesn't feel as premium as the Charge 5, something that it does have going for it is this light feature. Now, this isn't the best light feature out there, and you can barely see it when you're outdoors, but it is something. And from Sony's app, you can select from a few different lighting modes, and you can even use Sony's Fiestable app to somewhat customize the color of this light feature. But regardless, like I said, both of these speakers are mid-sized speakers that you can easily throw into your backpack and take on the go with you, and you're not going to have to worry about either of these speakers because they're both very durable thanks to their mostly fabric bodies, and since they're both rocking IP67 ratings, they're both waterproof and dustproof. But now let's talk about tech specs. Regarding battery life, the Charge 5 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, but the 20-hour battery life is for when this speaker is playing at 50% volume. Real-world use with the speaker playing at 80% volume, the Charge 5 is good for around 10 hours of playback time, which is not bad at all. But just keep in mind, if you were to use this speaker at a higher volume, then its battery life is going to drain faster. Now, the XB33 has two advertised battery lives. It has an advertised battery life of 24 hours and an advertised battery life of 14 hours. Now, the XB33 can hit 24 hours, but you gotta use it while at 50% volume with its light feature turned off and while in stamina mode. And quite frankly, stamina mode makes this speaker sound very flat to the point where it's not even worth using. So, real-world use with the speaker playing at 80% volume while in extra bass mode, which is how you should use this speaker, and with this light feature turned on, it's good for around 7 hours of playback time. Now, you could always stretch out its battery life if you were to use it with its light feature turned off, but nonetheless, the Charge 5 does have the better stamina here. But this now leads us to the ports on these speakers. Now, both of these speakers charge via a USB-C port, as they should. It's 2021. And both of these speakers have a USB-A out port so that you can charge your own devices. However, neither of these speakers have an audio jack, and you can't use a wired connection with either of these speakers, period, because the USB-C ports on both of these speakers are strictly used for charging. Personally, I think it would be better if Sony and JBL traded the USB-A out ports for an audio jack, because I feel mid-sized speakers like these should still have an audio jack just in case, and allow the USB-C port on both of these speakers to both be used for charging the speakers themselves and for charging your own devices, like you can with the USB-C port found on the JBL Extreme 3. Because I feel USB-A isn't going to be as popular in the near future because a lot of phones these days now come included with a USB-C cable. Even iPhones now come included with a USB-C to Lightning cable. So I think it would be more beneficial if we kept the audio jack instead of holding on to the USB-A out port, because there's a perfectly good USB-C port on both of these speakers that is being underutilized. Because for right now, you can only use these speakers wirelessly. But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. The XB33 has dual frontward firing triangular transducers and dual passive radiators that shoot out its sides. This is very similar to older JBL speakers like the Charge 3, and it's similar to a lot of current speakers on the market. And the XB33 has an output of 30 watts, whereas the JBL Charge 5 has a slightly different speaker setup. The Charge 5 has a 30-watt woofer, a new 10-watt tweeter, and it has your typical dual passive radiators that shoots out its sides. Now, the new tweeter on the Charge 5 is a pretty big deal because it does help the Charge 5 sound more open and have better instrument separation, because the highs are handled by the tweeter and the mids are handled by the woofer. But let me just show you.
You fill my soul with light the day we met. I don't wanna leave your side. Have me by your side when the sun sets. Let's leave for an eternity. We'll sail across the lights beyond the sky. I'll be with you eternally. I'm an addict for your love that keeps me
So, like you may have just seen, both of the drivers on the XB33 are doing the same type of work. Whereas with the Charge 5, the tweeter is taking care of the highs and the woofer is focusing on the mids. So overall, the Charge 5 does sound noticeably more open than the XB33. But this time around, the Charge 5 does have a slightly brighter sound signature to it, very similar to the Extreme 3. But so that you can see for yourself, we're going to jump into a sound test. Now, both of these speakers are playing at the same loudness, which is 85% volume for the Charge 5, and the XB33 is playing at 90% volume. But the XB33 is playing while in extra bass mode.
One look, the heat is rising, and I've been cold for so long. One touch and we're igniting, setting fire to it all. You know these flames ain't going out. This building is crumbling to the ground. Don't think that we can stop it now, 'cause baby our love is gonna burn down. You know these flames ain't going out. This building is crumbling to the ground.
So, like you may have just heard, these speakers sound very different from one another. From an instrument separation standpoint, the Charge 5 sounds noticeably more open than the XB33, thanks to its new woofer and tweeter setup. However, the Charge 5 does have a brighter sound signature to it, which really likes to bring the vocals out. Whereas the XB33 has a warmer sound signature to it, so vocals aren't as pronounced, but it does have more kick to its bass. Now, the Charge 5 also has a good amount of kick to its bass, but you do feel the bass a little more with the XB33. But when it comes to max volume, the Charge 5 does get noticeably louder than the XB33, in part because of its brighter sound signature. Now, both of these speakers get more than loud enough for indoor use, but if you are looking for a speaker to mostly use outdoors, then you do want to go with the Charge 5 because its brighter sound signature is also going to allow your music to travel out farther. But finally, there are two key things to keep in mind about these speakers when it comes to sound. For starters, the XB33 does allow you to adjust its EQ. So if you want, you can bring out the mids a little bit. But no matter how much you play around with this EQ, you're not going to get the XB33 to sound like the Charge 5. And second, neither of these two speakers are going to get you a performance bump if you use them while they're plugged in, like with the Extreme 3, which also charges via a USB-C port. Overall, I think both of these speakers sound good, but personally, I do prefer to listen to the Charge 5 because of the better instrument separation, and I like that it gets louder. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols. The Charge 5 is using JBL Party Boost, meaning that you can pair it up to other JBL Party Boost speakers like a JBL Boombox 2, an Extreme 3, a Flip 5, another Charge 5, or to a JBL Pulse 4. And like I've said in the past, JBL does speaker pairing protocols very well. You just press one button on each speaker, they pair themselves up. You don't gotta open any other apps. You can pair up to 100 speakers together, which is overkill. But more importantly, it just works. However, just keep in mind, you can't pair any JBL Party Boost speakers to any other JBL speakers that are either using JBL Connect or JBL Connect Plus. So if you've got a Charge 5, you can't pair it up to an original boombox, an Extreme 2, a Flip 4, a Charge 4, or to a JBL Pulse 3. And you also can't pair any JBL Party Boost speakers to any JBL Party Boxes. So even though Party Boost is great, there is some fragmentation to look out for. Now, Sony also has some fragmentation to look out for. The XB33 is using Sony's new Party Connect, meaning that you can only pair it up to other Party Connect speakers, like either a Sony XB43, another XB33, or to a Sony XB23. And unfortunately, you can't pair any Party Connect speakers to any of Sony's older speakers that are using wireless party chain. And overall, even though Party Connect is a little more reliable than wireless party chain, it's still not as reliable as JBL's Party Boost. It doesn't connect as fast, sometimes it does get disconnected from your phone, and sometimes it just doesn't pick up some speakers. So if you're planning on getting multiple speakers and constantly pairing them up together, I do recommend that you go with JBL because Party Boost is easier to use and you do have a wider range of speakers to choose from. So with all that being said, when it comes to choosing between the JBL Charge 5 and Sony XB33, for me, the clear winner here is the JBL Charge 5. Even though the Charge 5 does have a brighter sound signature this time around, thanks to its new tweeter and woofer speaker setup, the Charge 5 has better instrument separation than the XB33. But sound quality aside, the Charge 5 does have the longer lasting battery life here without any compromises. It has the more reliable speaker pairing protocol, and it also doesn't hurt that the Charge 5 does have the more premium build quality. The only thing that I feel that's missing on the Charge 5 is an audio jack, because you never know. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.